We're going to talk about some of the tools and settings now. First, there's a new button here that kind of looks like a stopwatch, and I just wanted to point that out. If we touch that button, it does show, right now I've got the fill timer disabled. My out of wet grain timer is currently full, but last time the cycle took 9 minutes and 29 seconds. Really nice change here. You used to have no idea unless you watched the timer itself. Fill request fault, out of wet grain, you can see the minimum and the maximum times that it's taking. When the load system turns on, it'll actually show you, as it turns things on and off, and their load times, delay on, delay off, is all in there as well. So nice new button, gives you a lot of information that none of the previous versions had. Now we're going to take a look at settings. And just to be able to show you everything, I'm going to go ahead and turn on admin settings and make those visible. I want to look at load settings first. And a very common thing to use is the load delay timer. So I'm going to go ahead and hit accept here, and this is just because I turned on the admin settings. So the load delay timer basically is a timer that when the paddle switch comes down and the dryer is saying, hey, I want grain, feed grain to me, we could say, yeah, I understand that, but I'd like you to wait another 60 seconds or 120 seconds. You notice it's in seconds. We can add that in there if we want and have a delay, and basically that'll minimize how many cycles per hour that our fill equipment has to turn on and off. So we just have to be careful there that if the dryer is running really fast, we don't want to expose the top of the dryer, let hot air out without actually going through the grain. So that's load system delay timers. Auxiliary 1, auxiliary 2 timers. The new thing that I wanted to show you here is we not only have on delay, but now there is off delay. So if maybe you have a double run feeding the top of a gravity fill dryer and there is room in the dryer to let the double run clear out, you can put an off delay. You can add 5 or 10 or 15 seconds here. Just note there's warnings there that's saying, hey, it is possible. We don't know that you have enough room to put the grain in there, so you have to take the responsibility of that so we don't burn up any belts or break anything. That is what basically that is saying. A couple other things. The out of wet grain timer. So this is a timer that basically says when the dryer starts loading a load or a fill cycle, it needs to be completed within 10 minutes. We can change that 10 minutes or we can shut it off, either one. So that's out of wet grain timer. And then another one is a fill timer. So the fill timer, basically, if that's turned on and the default is on, says that, hey, every 15 minutes we need to run a fill cycle or a fill sequence to the dryer. And if we don't run it every 15 minutes, that's only 4 times an hour. Something's got to be wrong. Our fill switch has got to be stuck, not giving us good information. Now, sometimes if you have a setup where maybe your wet receiving leg is dumping into the dryer first and then overflows back into your wet bin, while you're hauling trucks during the day, it may not get to a fill cycle within 15 minutes if your trucks are spaced out, and we don't want that shutting the dryer down. So in some operations we need to shut this fill timer off during the day while we're hauling grain, and then at night when we stop harvest, stop hauling grain in, and we're just depending on the wet bin, we need to turn that back on so we still have that protection. So that would be a pretty common situation to need that turn that fill timer on and off depending on what the harvest process is. Okay, we'll back up out of this and go into some fan and heat settings. And a number of different things here. A couple things I'd like to show you. Plenum out of range shutdown. This is disabled from the factory. If you want to turn it on, we could say, and I would make this kind of conservative. We could say that, hey, if over 15 consecutive minutes I'm not within 10 degrees of my plenum temp set point, shut the dryer down. Something has got to be wrong. We've seen this happen where maybe a dryer's on natural gas and the incoming supply drops. It's enough to keep flame sense, but it's not enough to dry corn, and the plenum temp is way off, and maybe the dryer ran all night and put a bunch of too wet corn into a dry bin. So this type of thing could potentially prevent that. Next thing I want to take a look at, low temp options. So if we were wanting to be able to dry maybe wheat in the summer at a lower temperature, I can turn on the low temp option. Now what that does for me, if I back up and go to my plenum min-max limits, Normally, our minimum is 140 degrees. Once I turn on low temp, now I'm allowed to set that down to 90 degrees. So the reason that is there is for legacy or older series of dryers that had Starfire type burners in them. If you ran too low of a temperature, flame could pop inside the port cup, burn up parts of the dryer and destroy them. With the new style burners we have, there's no danger to the burner itself. However, you do need to typically run 40 or 50 degrees above outside air or ambient temperature on your drying temp, just to have enough flame so that you can accurately sense it without nuisance faults. So yeah, that's the low temp option. The high temp option works the same way, only it allows you to set it instead of 220 up to 240 degrees. Generally not too much reason to need to go that hot to dry corn. Okay, and then the next one is going to be our unload settings menu. So we'll touch that one. Just look at a couple things here. We already talked about the reaction or gain, or how aggressive the dryer makes changes. Again, for temperature, I'd recommend 100 to 150. For moisture, if you're actually doing on moisture-based control, 80 is a good place to start. So that's where that is. If you want to set limits, a maximum and a minimum limit of how fast you're going to allow the dryer to run, maybe we have a takeaway system that can only handle the dryer running at 50%. We can set that and kind of basically let the dryer operate in a narrower unload speed possible window. Good thing to set once you kind of know where it needs to be. Probably don't recommend making too many other changes on this page. One last thing in the settings menu, configure user faults. So the dryer has an extra fault that is wire number U that we just jump out from the factory, but you can use that on your farm for whatever you want. You could have just need an open close switch that could be that the takeaway conveyor is running, or you could use it on a fill switch on the big bin, and when the bin gets full, it opens the switch and shuts the dryer off. And you might want to change the text from user fault, which nobody knows what that means. You could type this in and say, wet elevator not running, or big bin is full, or whatever you want it to say, and however you want to use that. Okay, we're going to back up now and just look at just a few of the tools menus in the dryer. Okay, now we're going to talk about grain settings. So settings, grain settings. And this is where we configure a lot of different things. If it has a T6035 or T6045 moisture sensor, input or output if it has it. Almost all of them are going to be T6045. We are set as a static sampler. Very common on mixed flow or tower dryer, optional on cross flow dryers. And most of all of them are going to be 4 1/4 by 4. And then this box here goes with that. So it's showing basically that we're going to take a sample every minute. Note, I can change that and I can go from 1 to 3. So personally, I like setting these on 2 minutes, and I like averaging the last 5 samples together. So that basically gives me a 10-minute running average. And on our main running screen, it's going to show the last sample it took, and it's going to show the average of the last 5 because I have 5 selected here. Okay, so a new thing in here is we're going to hit View General, and this is going to give us a table of all the events that have happened on the dryer. So you can see we just changed our minimum temp range. Grain dryer alert, we accepted a legal disclaimer about the heat options. Every 5 minutes it's going to show us input moisture, input temp, column temp, output moisture, output temp, roll speed. And you notice there's just multiple pages. So anything that you do on the dryer, any event that happens, or just 5-minute data is displayed on this new control values log. So very nice. We can also add a user note if we want to put a note in here that maybe now we're drying corn from Mom's North 80 or whatever the field was, or maybe a hybrid, whatever you want to put in there, you can add a note that will appear on that table as well. So nice new feature in 4.0 software. We already talked a little bit about system tools, but this is where you can change time and date, system information, where we see the software version that the dryer has on it. A number of other things on here as well. If we had an air system with the dryer, this is where we could go to tools and then air system control. Okay, another thing in tools is in update tools, if we hook internet up to this with our MySoupUp remote web access, highly recommend to disable Windows Update. We don't want Windows to automatically try to update itself. Usually it will happen in the middle of the night when your dryer's running, and it will shut your dryer off. There are potential for some updates that could even crash it and cause us to have to reload Windows on there. So before you plug an internet cable into the touchscreen to use that feature, definitely go to Tools, Update Tools, and disable Windows Updates. So that's important. And then another one here is going to be Shutdown Tools menu. So here's several different ways that we could shut down the dryer. We could do a timer shutdown where I want to set a timer and say, okay, I want this dryer to run for 4 more hours and shut off. I could do it with a discharge moisture alarm. Not a big fan of that one because the moisture can change, but we could say, you know, if we're 2% off for 30 consecutive minutes, I can have it either give me just a shutdown or a notification on the screen, and I would have to turn it on if I want to enable that feature. An alarm clock, so basically I can just set exactly what time I want the dryer to shut down, so that can happen. We already talked about the plenum out of range. There is one more shutdown, and it's called a bushel shutdown, but before we can do that, we have to calibrate our bushel counter. So if I go to calibrate sensors and then bushel counter, it can see that we might do a manual calibration here. And at 100% meter roll speed, the dryer that we told it is by the book supposed to do 3,100 bushels per hour, and I just hit calculate ratio there. If I want a more accurate one, I can do an automatic calibration, and here I would basically push this and I would tell it when to start and when to stop, and I would need to load a truck or something that I could measure and then come back and tell it exactly how many bushels it was over that amount of time. So that'd be a more accurate way to do it. Once I have my bushel counter calibrated, now I can go to, in the tools menu, I can look at the shutdown tools, and now I have a bushel shutdown. So I can tell it, hey, dry another 3,000 bushels and shut off, or whatever you want to do, and then turn that on. The other thing that it gave me in the tools menu was a bushel counter. So this button appeared once I'd calibrated, and this works just like the trip odometer on your pickup. You can reset it and just have it start counting bushels as it's drying. So if I want to keep track of roughly how many bushels I put into a bin, I can do that. And it's not counting necessarily test weight. It's just counting metering roll rotation in the unload system. So not necessarily perfectly precise, but it gives you a pretty good idea of where we are for bushels. And again, those things won't come up until you calibrate the bushel counter on the dryer. We also already talked about graphs, but just to show, there's a number of different graphs on here. You can see graphs for plenum temperature, moisture, grain temperature, unload speed. EMOV stands for electronic mod valve, and then we talked a lot about the column temp. And then we can also go to the view recent data log, and that's where we kind of saw the table version of that is new. Okay, there's a number of other things in here, but this sums up the most common things used within the tools and settings menus.